Hi, friends. It's your girl Harpo, and welcome to episode 6 of Brown Girl Guilt. This episode is titled A Woman Has No Home, and I'm going to let you in on a little bit of a secret on what it means to be a woman. So, to be a woman is to not have a home, and to have no one understand that you have no home. To be a woman is to chase your whole life, spend the entirety of your life finding a home. It's to unpack and pack and leave and to unpack and to settle in again and again, time after time. To be a woman is to not have stability, a foundation you're working on building. And to be a woman is to not get comfortable settling in. It's the constant being told your home is the next one or the one that you came from. To be a woman is to not have a home and to be looked at, called names, outcasted even if you do. It's to be denied the personhood that comes from having a home. It's to have all these definitions of a home, but no real understanding of a home. To be a woman is to not have a home and to constantly try and search for your home. I wrote that as a journal excerpt on the day that my parents asked me to go look at a new house. How is it? They asked me when I got home. I couldn't even keep it in, bro. I just burst out crying. They were so confused and asked me why I was crying so much. I said to them, we'd only been living in this current house for just over a year, and because I was away for school for most of the time, I'd only just started settling into this brand new house after leaving a previous home for 15 years. I looked at them and said through my tears, I've barely begun settling down my roots, and now that I have some sense of a home and some stability, you want me to uproot again. From the outside looking in, this is an incredibly privileged thing to be upset about and to cry over. Like, honey, you're crying because your parents want you to move into a bigger house? Like, boo hoo, wow, rich bitch. But the real reason was that as a 24-year-old, I'm very cognizant that as a Punjabi woman, I've got an expiration date tattooed on my back, right? I'm very cognizant that the time in this home of my parents is only getting shorter and shorter. And Punjabi daughters, we get married, we have a very dramatic doli, and then we leave. And I knew I was getting closer and closer to that. And to spend the last few years of living with this childlike wonder in the home of my parents, moving yet again? Nah, bro, I wasn't down for that. Something my mom always told me is "Timi da koi ghar nahi banda." Okay? "Timi da koi ghar nahi banda." A woman has no home. She's always implored me my whole life to build my own home, to never leave one man's home, so the home of my father, to directly to another man's home, so my husband's home. And so in this episode, I sat down with one of my dearest and loveliest friends, kindest friends, Nimi Chauhan, who you might have heard before because she's a powerhouse in this community. She's done so much good work in this community. But I sat down to chat with Nimi about something different than the work that she often talks about in this community. Of the many things I look up to Nimi for, perhaps her strong conviction to just live her damn life is number one. She's a single Punjabi woman in her 40s and she lives alone. All the aunties, I'm sorry if you heard that. Yeah, I know, crazy, right? A single Punjabi woman in her 40s living alone in a home that she freaking owns, bro. She owns the whole damn house. And so, in a community where a woman has no home, and in a community where a woman who has a home is rare, I chat with Nimi about her house and her home and what that entire part of her life has been like. Okay. Hello, Nimi. How are you today?
I'm good, Harp. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because I think this is a side of you that we don't get to really explore publicly often. I was saying that in my introduction that I'm sure everyone has heard of you, has seen you at some point or met you at some point, but today's going to be a conversation that is different than what they're probably used to.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
This episode is titled A Woman Has No Home, and you are a woman in my life who has a home. She has her own home. How long have you been living alone in your home for?
Um, I've been living alone since I was 19. Um, I've been living alone in my own home that I own since I was 30.
And how's that been for you, like living on your own for all this time? Like what has it been like for you to live first on your own since you were 19? That's a pretty young age to start living by yourself. That's like Gora style, to start living on your own around 18, 19. You've been living on your own for so long. What's it been like?
Yes, I I started living on my own. I did 1 year. I was born and raised in the Okanagan, and so I did 1 year of university there, and then I transferred out this way. And my parents didn't want me to live with family. They preferred that I live alone, and so I was living on rent in like a basement suite, and going to school.
Hmm. It seems to me, like, for me at least, you're living my dream, right? Like, you have your own home, you have your own house, you have your own schedule and your life, everything. And it's so uncommon to hear that a Punjabi woman own their own home and then to live on their own. And even if it is common, I feel like seldom are people are going around and being like very vocal about it. Or it's like a temporary occurrence, like it was in my case when I lived alone for 1 year in Montreal. I knew I was just going to go and do it for a year and then come back and then be back into my house again. You just said that you were working, so you were born and raised in the Okanagan and then you moved away for school, but live like owning your own home at 30. How did that happen for you? How did that like come about that you were like, I'm just going to have my own home at age 30? I'm going to decide not to live with my parents. um and even with maybe even your sibling, like I know your sister lives in the city and she also lives but with herself. How did that happen?
Um, my brother, my sister, and I all reside here, and we live separately. But when after I finished my degree, um, it was I knew when I left that I was never going to go back to the Okanagan. Um, that and so when I moved, I finished school. I started working. I worked a lot, and so by the time, but my parents helped and supported me buying a home because they said that they never wanted to um, differentiate between my brother um, or myself and my sister. They wanted to treat all three of us the same. So and my I was raised with the idea of that I should be independent and I should never have to rely on anyone. So my parents both really encouraged that. And so at 30, they did help me purchase my own home. And then after that, everything else that I've done on my own. I mean, it was an older house. And so yeah, over the years, I've taken care of it, updated it, managed it. But it was my parents' mentality, the way that we were raised, that allowed me to even think that I could do this and I wanted to. They've never asked me to move back. Not because of, oh, like society pressures. They've said like, hey, it would be nice to see you back here. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. And now my parents reside here. So yeah.
Have you felt any sort of like, have you felt any negative energy from anyone else in your family about the fact that you are a single Punjabi woman in her 40s living in her own home? Because I know for me, like, there's parts of that about you as my friend that I have to hide from some like family members or some friends or some people in the community where if they know like I'm your friend or something, I don't know why. I don't know why I do it. I just hide the fact that like, oh, I have a friend named Nimi who is like a woman in her 40s living alone in her own home, because there's like a for me I feel like there's like a weirdness attached to it, not by me but other people. Have you received that kind of negative energy from anyone else?
Absolutely. I think some would think that I may be a bad influence, or that I'm going to try to influence their daughter to live alone. And I think if the sad part is, I think if anyone really knew me, that I would never do that. But I have family, extended family, who believes through this subtle ways that they are or have been, or things that they've said to their daughters, and they've told me, not directly but indirectly, that this is something that my mom said, or she kind of hinted at this, that has led me to believe that they think that I am a bad influence, or because I'm not married and I've never been married, and that I live on my own and I'm too independent, or have too many independent thoughts, or she's so out there. And I do get it from I mean, I get it from the general population and I also get it from my family. So I've had people say it to my face. I know people say it to my parents or have said it to my parents. And people say it behind my back as well. And I'm well aware of that.
Yeah, I can imagine because you're right. When you said that point about, people are gonna think that I'm a bad influence on their daughters, that's exactly what I think too. It's like the reason that I don't wanna say that I do have a friend like yourself who's living on her own in her own home is because I don't want them to, automatically start forming these, like, judgments and this stigma in their mind and to, like, be like, "Oh, no, my daughter can't go there, or my daughter can't hang there," or, I mean, my parents aren't the ones who are thinking this, but I think for the general public around us, they are very judgmental and they're like, well, obviously you are going to go there and you're going to learn the things that you're learning, or you are the person that you are because you surround yourself with women like that, which is so annoying because the fact that you do have your own space, like nobody would question a man. Nobody would ever say to a younger male or younger boy, like if he was going to like a bachelor pad, if he was going to the house or the home of a man who lived on alone and was single, nobody would ever say that he's making a bad influence on that person. But with women, I don't understand why that's such a taboo topic. And when you were speaking earlier about how your parents supported you and your parents were really cool about it, I feel like something that my mom has always told me, and I also mentioned this in the intro, is that my mom always used to say to me, like, "Timi la koi ghar nahi banda," right? To make sure that you make your own home, because a woman really has no home. She goes straight from her father's home to another man's home, and whether that's her husband or her father-in-law, that's the house that you go to. And so she's always implored me to have that middle space to like have your own home. And anytime I feel like I've vocalized that to like either other family members or people in general, they're like I've been met with a lot of resistance because I've said to my parents all like so many times that 28 is my cutoff, right? If I'm in a relationship by 28 and we're about to get married, I'll move out that way. Or if I'm single at 28, I probably want to like dip out and go get my own place. I want to be financially stable enough at 28 to be able to do that. And I met with a lot of confusion. It's like, well, why do you want to leave? Like, it's so taboo for daughters, especially daughters. I mean, people like kids in general in our community, but so taboo for daughters to just move. It's like, well, why would you need to move out? What is it that you're going to do on your own? And I think people don't understand the concept of having your own space.
No, they don't. I mean, in our culture, you're not supposed to be too independent. You're not supposed to be, obsessed with having your own space. They are constantly pushing family and togetherness and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's also nothing wrong with being independent and having your own space, or having yeah, some like a space that you can call your own and your own home that you've actually um, put your own money into and you can be proud of. There's you can't replace that feeling. I've had family say to my parents too that we don't know why you did that, or we could never do what you did for your daughters for ours. And I've heard people say this and come to my house, even when I was actually leaving for school that week, about 2 weeks before I left when I was 19. There was a couple people that came to our home trying to convince my dad not to let me go and live alone, like have me live with relatives. And I've got plenty of family here. But my dad was like, no, I do not want her to live with any family. So, again, I'm grateful that my parents are very progressive in their thoughts and don't think that way at all. I was never told you have to wait till you get married to do that. You can't do this now. They never said that to me or my sister.
Well, I think you and I can both attest to this because you started to live on your own at 19 and I have lived on my own at 22, 23. That there's a different kind of uckle that comes with living on your own. When you're living by yourself, there's a different kind of uckle.
Oh,
And I think that for right? And to be taught that you can't do something like that or you can't be granted that space and it can only be found in the confinements of, let's say, marriage where you can move out with your partner and then live together and find that. That's not the case, right? The entire uckle of it comes from the fact that you live alone. And a friend of mine actually said this to me yesterday, where there's a different kind of responsibility that comes from waking up by yourself in a place alone and dealing with your like depression or like dealing with your anxiety or dealing with whatever that comes from that you can't get that when you're living in a home with other people. And I think it's so interesting that we always wrap this idea of freedom around in this nice little bow that is called marriage, and that's not the case, right? There's no way that that's your ticket to freedom.
I never saw marriage as my ticket to freedom. If anything, I thought the opposite. And so when you look at living alone and what you learn from that learning that you acquire while you're living alone and that responsibility that you take on, you'll never get anywhere else. And I can see the difference even between when men and women when they're living at home with their parents, and then those men and women turn around and get married, and then they purchase their own home. They've actually never lived alone, and that responsibility of buying your own grocery, paying for your own bills, doing all of those things by yourself. The responsibility that comes for it. There's no one who's paying my electrical or my gas or any my heat bills or anything like that. There's no one buying my toilet paper, my Kleenex. I have to buy that. Responsibility is something that you will never get if you're just moving from one place to another. And I know some people will be like, well, I don't want that, but personally, I can see the difference that it does, and I would recommend, even if it's a year or two, that everyone live alone for just even if it's temporary. Try it.
Yeah, and I think that there's also an element, of, like I don't know what the word is, I don't know what the term is or the feeling is, but this idea of, like, having, an anchor, having stability, and so for a lot of women in our community, I know I can see it in my own family, the men are the breadwinners in the house, and so they're the ones who technically own the home and are financing the home, and it's theirs, right? And so their families just live in the home, and even if that's not explicitly said all the time, there is this sense of like, this is my dad's home, this is my or this is like my husband's home. And I think that it's so for me at least, I've never liked that. I've never liked this idea that I've lived in this home and I've seen the women in my family, the women in my community, like be the homemakers, right? Be the ones that are taking care of the home and taking care of everything, but it's still not being theirs at a fundamental level. And I think that's the insecurity for me as a woman of I need to have my own place before I just hop into another place, because that insecurity is something that I know really well and I don't want to repeat as an older adult woman.
No, yeah, yeah, like I see that a lot with the women that I worked with in the past, whether it was through domestic violence or just family, like the parenting groups or whatever type of work I've done. I've often seen the toll that it takes on women when and even if they do work and have a full-time job but the man makes more money, or um, the and growing up and watching extended family, my family, knowing that they make less or they work and do more than the man does, but that home is still classified as the husband's home and not theirs. Um, or that, well, he did it, not you, type of thing, right? So that pressure, or that subtle that subtle message that we're sending, or that has been sent, I think it takes a toll, I think, on women, and I've seen it, and I didn't like that, and I've never wanted to feel that way.
Hmm. It does. It does take a toll, because if you're responsible for all the emotional labor of this home and then it's not even technically yours, it's crazy. And I think like for me, I mean, there's so much messaging everywhere around you since you're, a kid as a daughter. Like you hear this messaging of like, this is not your home. One day you're gonna leave, you're gonna go to your actual home. But then when you get to that home that you think is your home, you're still sometimes treated as like as a guest or as like a new member, and so you can never fully really settle down. But I wanted to shift gears and just talk about this idea of we talked a little bit about the negative energy that we receive, or you might have received, or women who live alone might have received. And I think that the negative energy comes from this like these stigmas attached with Punjabi women living alone. And so some of the stigmas that I've listed and I can think of, and I'm so curious to get your take on it, is first of all, the biggest assumption, right? The biggest stigma, the assumption that you're sexually active and engaging in premarital sex. Like, why else would you need to live alone? And if you are living alone, "Eh, putte kaam karti honi hai," right? And then the idea that your parents are probably funding all of it. So it's like she's just freeloading because there's no way she can afford to live in a home by herself, especially in this economy. And then the third one that I can think of is, oh, Bachari, like she's so old now. She probably couldn't find anyone, and that's why she's single, and she's single by her own fault. So it's okay. Rehn do, appi rehn do. She can live by herself. And I think these three stigmas piss me the F off because none of those are ever like the case for wanting to live on your own. And even if they are, why do people care so much?
So I'm going to address all three because those messages have been delivered my way. The first one, that being sexually active, which I thought was absolutely insane. Um, I think for me, originally, when I was able to, when I moved and was on my own at 19, and I was going to school, it was fine. But as I approached my late 20s and early 30s, that's when people started saying, like, okay, well, why isn't she getting married? And maybe, she doesn't want to get married. I remember a woman, my mom was quite upset because a woman had the audacity to say to her in a group that, oh, well, some girls just don't, they'd rather just keep living on their own so they can have multiple boyfriends and do whatever they want, live with someone if they want to, and just not get married. And my mom comes home and calls me and tells me this, and I started laughing. And I said to her, well, you see me all the time. And I said, so I'm not living with anyone. And I said, my history in terms of relationships or non-relationships, not having relationships. So I said, so why don't you just brush it off? And she's like, it was really insulting, and but I've never felt that I cared, because everyone's going to have an opinion. So I really don't care. I'm going to live my life the way that it makes me happy. What was the second thing that you said, Harp, about?
Your parents are probably funding it and that you probably can't afford it on your own anyway.
Yes. And so I've had family assume that my dad was footing the bill because I had to do a lot of work on my house after I purchased it. Um, and most of the relatives thought that my dad furnished my house and paid for anything that I did in terms of updates and stuff. My dad helped me the first year with a couple of the updates because at that time I couldn't. But after I've been in my house for 14 years, and my dad helped me the first year, and after that he hasn't, and nor does he need to. He's offered, but he doesn't need to, and I don't need him to. So that had my dad also had to correct and say, no, I actually don't pay for anything of hers. She does it all herself. And so I think if I ever said that, they're like, oh yeah, yeah, sure, you pay for everything yourself. And so when my dad corrected and told a few of our relatives that, yeah, she actually does pay for it all herself, then people stopped saying anything. And I think through our like family friends, they're well aware of my ability and what I do and what I don't do and what my parents would do. And so there's no question with that. I think sometimes actually extended family has more assumptions about us than anyone else does. And then just your random strangers, but I mean, who cares? Like I even look at my neighbors and I'm like, oh, I'm sure that like, a couple of them are Indian. I'm sure they think that, who is this girl who lives on her own? Um, but yeah, so I do find it comical because I know people have that question. It's always in the back of their mind because we're supposed to fit into a certain mold, and I don't happen to fit into that mold. And you mentioned a third thing as well.
Yeah, and so the third thing is very like, I was gonna say that the third thing is you're probably single by your own fault or that there's something wrong with you if you're single. And, if we think about, like, pop culture references, women who are older or, like, women who in general are, like, living alone and they're single, we see them as, like, witches or like spinsters and like crazy cat ladies, and that there's like something wrong with them and that's why they live alone. And you're so right, like your neighbors, like if I feel like you and I've talked about this before where you're like, I don't engage with my neighbors because they probably think I'm crazy anyway. And so yeah, the idea that you're probably single by your own fault, and then there's this like added layer of like I don't know what the word is, but like you feel bad for her because she's like older and single and probably lives like oh fine, let her live on her own. It already sucks for her that she's single at this age.
Yeah, and I think those that know me definitely don't feel sorry for me, and definitely don't think that, oh, the poor thing, she never got married. Those who don't know me may think that way. I think because I've been public about certain aspects of my life, such as my that I'm a survivor, and I think some of them may attribute some of that to that. I don't know. No one has actually said anything to my face about not being married. Relatives, I think, they try that pressure of like, hey, you should try meeting this person or whatever, and that happened when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, but I just wasn't interested in the types of folks that they've brought forward. Um, and I'm not someone who believes that you have to get married for the sake of being married. I think life is way more than that. And I don't know. I think I've found my purpose, and if marriage happens, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. But there is that definite feeling like, oh, you're such a nice person. How come you're not married? Oh, like that. And I've had like people from my mechanic to like, like there's lots of people who say that. And but I mean, you can't. I'm not going to go around explaining who I am and myself to anyone. That's their opinion and their attitude, and they can have it like it, and that's okay because everyone can have an opinion. It just doesn't
Mhm.
matter, and how much we let it impact us is up to us, right? So.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, like, and try to get as specific as you can so that, people can understand who are listening. And also for me too, I'm really curious because I said you're living my dream. But what has having your own home meant for you as a woman? What do you think that you've gained as a woman living on your own in your own home that you might not have been able to gain had this not been your reality?
Never having to rely on someone, um, the financial independence that comes with it, the stability. Um, my future, yeah, is secured by myself and not tied to anyone else. And that makes me really happy, and that makes my parents almost actually happier than I am. And they tell me that all the time, that you'll never have to rely on someone else, and you'll never have to be tied. And both of my parents are, um, they really like that, and I do too. I love the fact that, and I mean, in the type of work that I've done, being able to come back to my own home, and looking around and knowing that everything I've done myself. There's a sense of, I think there's a sense of confidence actually that comes with that, and stability, and just knowing that you can do it. I think, is it comes with that as well. So.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there's a very deep level of self love that develops and a deep level of self care that develops when you're living on your own because you really, I mean, obviously you have family, you have friends, you have people that you can rely on and lean on when, shit hits the fan, but the day to day is really you, and I think that's such a powerful kind of self-love that you might not get if you do not grant yourself that space. And solitude is beautiful. I know when I lived alone, I loved pockets of solitude. I mean, there were some nights when I wished I could come home and kind of have someone there, whether it was like, a family member or partner or whatever. But I think for the most part, the solitude was so important for me to like really gain like a deep level of clarity. And I mean, this because there was no one that I called more than, let's say, my parents when I was living in Montreal than you. I used to call you so much. We used to talk on the phone for hours when I lived there. But that's where like the deepest level of self love for me developed when I was living alone. And I think that we don't grant ourselves that time because it's so scary to be on our own sometimes, and it's so scary to just like with like one of the episodes earlier was block out the noise, and so it's so scary for us to block out the noise and just get really clear with ourselves. but it's doable, like you said, like you can do it.
Yeah, it is scary, I think, when people are left with themselves and no one else and nothing else. There's no distractions. Your own thoughts and yourself are who you're with. And so having that self love or that appreciation for yourself and who you are comes with this piece for sure.
Mhm. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Nimi, for having this chat with me. You are not a bad influence. You've been a great influence on my life, and I'm sure a lot of other young women in your life. I don't know, man. Low key, sometimes it feels like you're my mom. Low key, sometimes it feels like you're my older sister. Low key, sometimes it feels like I'm just like a younger version of you. So, thank you for adding the value that you have added to me and to my life. I really appreciate you.
I'm really grateful for this conversation. Thank you for having me on. And yes, I look at you the same way, actually. Sometimes a younger version of myself. And I remember sometimes that your mom is my age. And so I'm like, you could be my
Literally,
kid.
they're the exact same age. Yeah.
Yeah. I do hope that, and I think it's sad when people think that someone who is living on their own or someone who's not living the norm is a bad influence. I don't think we should be able to give people that much power or think that we're that weak that someone is able to influence us that easily. I think if you raise your child with goodwill and to trust their own ability and trust in their own parenting and what they've instilled in them, someone else can't rock that, and they should have a little bit more sense of security around that. But that's a whole other issue.
Absolutely. Okay, guys. Normally, I say something super profound after the episode has ended or the conversation has actually ended with the guest. But in this case, I really don't have anything profound to say. It's just that Nimi said it all. She said, even though it does seem hard, it is doable. And it is doable. I think putting ourselves first, loving ourselves, creating a beautiful, deep sense of security for ourselves is completely possible, even if it seems like it isn't. So, on that note, Brown Girl Guilt episode every Sunday. You better have caught up on the last ones and you better be excited for the next ones. Make sure you are liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, leaving reviews on all the episodes. And you can give us a listen and give us a DM and just give us some love. Make sure you're practicing gratitude, glory, and grace. And I can't wait to see you guys next time.